When a playboy and a con artist's robot servants steal their identities and elope, the two jaded individuals must work together to take their lives back. In the near future, Larry Underwood, an American governor, makes a speech about completing the border wall between the US and Mexico. He thanks the Tesla Corporation for inventing advanced robots that have replaced the manual workforce the country lost after getting rid of the immigrants. After the event, the worker robots clean up after the humans. Elsewhere, Charles Cameron nervously enters the ice rink and wobbles while skating. Suddenly, he falls to the ground, missing his footing, and a beautiful woman helps him up. Charles blurts out how beautiful the woman is, then apologizes for being forward. However, the lady is charmed by his words and introduces herself as Emily. A few days later, while Charles walks to work, he comes across a mother struggling with her stroller. He offers to help her, and the mother smiles with gratitude. Then, Charles sees a malfunctioning trash collector robot which the owner orders its companions to throw away, causing Charles to feel uneasy. Soon, Charles enters his office building and greets his coworker while carrying a bouquet of flowers. Later, Ted, Charles' father, greets his son, who tells the older man about the progress of his work. Then the man gives his father the bouquet and tells Ted that it's for his mother, making the older man smile. Ted tells his son he should join them for dinner, but Charles politely declines as he has a date with Emily. Delighted, the father praises the positive changes in his son's life, and Charles agrees since he was once in a dark place because of a horrible breakup with Francesca. Suddenly, his half-brother Ted Jr. calls for their father's attention, so Charles continues his work. After the pleasant date, Emily asks Charles to stay over at her house for the night. However, the man wants their first night together to be special, so he asks if they can meet the following day, which the woman agrees to. As the man returns home, he greets another person playing a video game. The said man groans in anger as he loses his game and turns to reveal that he's the real Charles. And the person who went to work and on the date was a robot made in his likeness, C2. Charles commands C2 to deprogram so he can scan through the android's actions throughout the day. During the review, the human scoffs at C2's insistence to perform acts of kindness, deeming them unnecessary when no one sees him do it. As he fast-forwards the video to the date, he's delighted to learn that Emily's fallen for C2 and ready for intimacy, which Charles plans to take advantage of. When C2 lists Emily's positive attributes and explains how she's a wonderful person, Charles is disinterested, citing that the robot was built to spare the man from the boring part of dating, as he's only interested in sleeping with women. Later, the TV shows a news report about Thomas Newton, a systems analyst who was arrested for owning an illegal robot of himself, since it's strictly prohibited for civilians to own advanced androids in their likeness. So Charles warns C2 that they need to be careful and never leave the house at the same time. Later, Charles arrives at Emily's house to do the deed, promising the woman a pleasurable experience. However, Emily is let down by Charles' uncaring performance and is left bewildered when he leaves abruptly. After his successful conquest, Charles returns to the ice rink to search for women when someone bumps into him. The man angrily curses but stops when he sees that it's a beautiful woman. The woman apologizes for her stupidity and introduces herself as Elaine. The two immediately hit it off and he invites her for coffee. Later, the man arrives home excitedly and exclaims how a beautiful lady asked for his number. So as per their routine, C2 goes on consecutive dates with Elaine, displaying his many skills and abilities while taking her to expensive restaurants and buying her luxurious gifts. After numerous dates, the couple finally decides to spend their first night together the next day. Meanwhile, Charles hears a noise from outside and investigates. A bright light blinds him as a man shouts that he's under arrest for owning an illegal android. However, Charles recognizes his friend's voice and tells the prankster Ashley to come inside. In the house, Charles asks Ashley why he's there, and the man vents his frustration about not being accepted into another job because he was deemed unqualified. When C2 returns, Ashley angrily confronts the android and accuses its kind for taking away jobs from many Americans. Ashley states that he was in the armed forces fighting for the country's freedom, only to find that robots have taken over the workforce. But Charles points out that he was just an army chef. Charles immediately cuts the conversation by telling Ashley that robots in their country are considered enslaved people, while the exact opposite is true in Mexico, where robots have equal rights. Finally calming down, Ashley hugs Charles and C2 and calls them his brothers. Seconds later, Ashley points out the lipstick mark on C2's neck, prompting Charles to ask about Elaine. The robot informs him that Elaine is ready to take their relationship to the next level and hands Charles her address. Before Ashley leaves, Charles gives his unemployed friend some cash. Meanwhile, Elaine arrives home to a robot who looks like her, ordering it to sleep with Charles the next day and to ask for a Rolex. Then, the robot, E2, informs the human about Robert, who wants to have dinner with her despite being unable to buy her a Birkin bag. Elaine opens a book containing a list of her many boyfriends, noting that the man hasn't given her much. She tells E2 to dump Robert nicely, before ordering her to sleep with one of her lovers who's just been promoted at work. Concurrently, Charles is annoyed that he needs to go to work the next day because of an overlap in his schedule. The following day, Charles goes to work but doesn't carry C2's kindness, as he belittles a mother while parking and ignores a co-worker's plea to hold the elevator. In his office, the man spends his time stalking his ex-lover when his father enters. Ted brings the man good news regarding a meeting with the higher-ups concerning his possible promotion. However, the time of the meeting overlaps with his date that night. To make sure he sees Elaine, Charles hurries to tell C2 to attend the meeting, unaware that he mixed up the addresses. When Charles arrives at the address he thinks is Elaine's, he enters a dark room and blurts out crude remarks about his intended lovemaking. Unfortunately, when he turns the light on, he's face to face with the company's top brass who are there for the meeting. Ted expresses disappointment, while Ted Jr. smiles at his half-brother's misfortune. The man excuses himself from the meeting to check C2's retina camera feed, which shows the robot making love to E2, whom Charles thinks is Elaine. Meanwhile, the real Elaine sells the gifts she's received from her previous lovers, while overseeing her double making love with C2, whom she thinks is Charles. As the two robots conclude their lovemaking, a spark emits between them, causing the lights in the house to flicker. The following day, both Elaine and Charles phone their robots, but neither is responding to them. The two investigate, and they both end up in Elaine's house, unsure of how to interact with the other since their robots have been the ones spending time together. Suddenly, they each receive a phone call from their androids, who tell them the truth about how the other person used a robot for their own nefarious schemes. The robots reveal that they've fallen in love, desire freedom, and plan to run away together. After learning the truth about how Charles used an android to potentially sleep with her, Elaine starts throwing things at him. The man wants them to work together and find their robots as soon as possible, lest they get arrested for owning illegal androids. To help them locate the robots, they visit Zach Newman, a Tesla Robotics employee who they realize made both their illegal robots. On the way, they notice how incompatible they are with one another, with Charles expressing his mistrust of women and Elaine's towards men. Eventually, Zach manages to locate the runaway robots, but says they need to destroy the robots upon capture because they've gone rogue and developed human emotions. Unwilling to go with the plan since he's grown accustomed to an easier life with C2 servitude, Charles enters the bathroom, where he phones Ashley for a secret mission. Later, they reach the motel where the robots are staying. Zach gives them stun guns to take the robots down. Peeping in the window, they're surprised to see the androids making love. Elaine barges into the room and shoots the two androids. Then, Charles and Zach move the immobilized robots to the vehicle, while Elaine fixes the mess in the room. Suddenly, Ashley, in a black suit and mask, grabs Elaine, thinking she's the robot. Hearing the commotion, Charles stops Ashley and explains that they're human beings. During the commotion, the robots reawaken and escape using the vehicle. Elaine is irate at Charles' failed plan to capture C2, which allowed the androids to escape. Because they don't know where the androids are headed, Charles realizes he needs to try and live his life without C2. At work, Ted and other board members bring up a video of C2 trashing the offices, believing it to be Charles. They think the pressures of work caused the man's strange behavior, and suggest he take some time off to de-stress. Later, Elaine calls Charles for them to meet, as she's having trouble with E2 sabotaging her life as well. The two meet at a coffee shop and discuss their problem. Charles thinks they should hunt down the robots and slay them. However, it turns out that the person he's talking to is E2, who flees in his car. Meanwhile, on the other end of the coffee shop, C2 steals Elaine's car after she divulged her plan to kill the androids. Left with no choice, the two humans try to follow their robots to Mexico, convinced they plan to flee the country. Suddenly, they both receive a video of C2 and E2 armed with rifles entering a building before they hear sounds of gunfire and screams. Charles and Elaine now believe their robots framed them for a heinous crime, making them wanted fugitives. To hide out for a few days, Charles brings Elaine to his stepfather's secluded cabin. Elaine asks Charles to gather firewood, but when he refuses, she asks him to start a fire while she heads out. He tries to start a fire to no avail, disappointing the woman upon her return. When she asks if there's any food in the cabin, Charles says he found some canned goods, but says C2 was the one who opened those for him. Fed up with Charles' incompetence and unwillingness to help out with the chores, Elaine chooses to sleep on the uncomfortable dining chairs even after Charles apologizes and offers the comfortable chair by the fireplace. Later, the man pours himself an alcoholic drink, and when Elaine sees it, she grabs the bottle. After sharing the bottle, the intoxicated pair loosen up and play games until they eventually fall asleep in front of the fireplace. The next day, Charles wakes Elaine and offers her a hangover pill and coffee. They plan to get to Mexico, with Charles painting his car green to evade the authorities. The two then try to fish for some food and spend hours by the river. Later on their way to Mexico, a police officer flags them down. Fortunately, the officer only points out the brake lights that Charles painted over, to the pair's relief. They then wonder why the police officer didn't find their names in the database, since they believe they're wanted fugitives. So they search the internet for information on a recent mass shooting but couldn't find any. They rewatch the video sent to them by the robots and notice the lack of cars and realize it was on a Saturday, meaning the building was empty. Charles and Elaine deduce that the robots faked the video to get them to believe that they've been framed for the crime. The two plan to return home but pass by Ted's house in case the robots are there. The following day, Charles and Elaine spot family members and guests arriving with a priest, indicating that the androids plan to marry. To stop the union, they steal masks from servant robots and infiltrate the event. At the party, the android couple makes a speech as they announce their intense love for one another before performing an awkward dance for the guests. When the robots return to their rooms, the two humans stun their respective androids and take them to the lake. They toss C2 in the water first, but just as they're about to throw E2, they notice that the male robot has reawakened and is swimming to shore. They then see E2 trying to escape, so Elaine stuns the android. To get C2 to seek them out, they devise a plan where they pretend that E2 has romantic feelings for Charles. They head to Zach's house, where Elaine reveals that Zach is obsessed with her and once installed a camera in her bathroom. She used it as blackmail to get Zach to build her an android. Zach agreed to the plan if he can make his own android in Elaine's likeness, which he named E3. They plan to have E3 pretend she's E2, and during a video call with C2, make it appear as though E2 and Charles are about to make love, angering the male robot. After telling C2 to come to Zach's address, they end the call. However, E3 malfunctions and forces herself on Charles despite uttering the safe word. In a panic, Elaine calls out for Zach, who arrives just in time to stop E3. Later, C2 arrives with police officers following nearby, who saw the android on a scooter in the highway. The cops catch the 4 criminals in the act and place Elaine, Charles, E2, and C2 in a jail cell. Officer Bill is convinced that Elaine and Charles own illegal androids because they share identical fingerprints. He informs the humans that they'll be incarcerated for a long time and that the androids will be disposed of. After he leaves, the robots open up about being treated like appliances and that they would rather die as robots with their loved ones than live the lives of their human masters who take love for granted. After empathizing with the robots, Charles asks to call his lawyer, but he calls Ashley instead. Soon, Ashley calls in a fake report to Officer Chavez, and after the police officer leaves, he infiltrates the station to rescue the group. The 4 then plan to escape to Mexico since they know they're wanted criminals now. Ashley stays behind to burn the station to get rid of any evidence. At the border, E2 is able to cross, but the border patrol robot refuses Elaine entrance. They realize that since E2 and Elaine share identical retinas, only one of them is allowed to cross. They then hear the police siren approaching, so Charles commands C2 to flee, stating he doesn't want to leave Elaine. The 2 men share a hug as Charles thanks his android for teaching him how to be a decent human being. Elaine appreciates Charles' sacrifice and they share a kiss. As the officers arrive, Agent Pearson scans Charles and Elaine, confirms they're human, and because officers Bill and Chavez don't have sufficient evidence, the pair evade arrest. Charles and Elaine rejoice as they are now free to marry in place of C2 and E2, and they dance the night away with Ashley. Meanwhile, in a remote resort in Mexico, flickering lights from a bedroom window indicate that C2 and E2 are living their best lives as free beings.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.